Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric and our continuing series Scale and Deliver, where I take a look at some of my favorite Taito superscalar games of all time. And today we're jumping right in because Gunbuster barely has any sort of intro. But this is an absolutely historical game. It was released in 1992 and is a first-person shooter for arcades released in the same year that Wolfenstein 3D did. It operates in part like a light gun shooter, but we are not on rails. We have free range of motion, and that is just wild. But before we get too further involved, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and that notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But you can't talk about Gunbuster without talking about the main hook, and that is free range of movement. How this game operates is you have an arcade stick, which is going to move you in the 4 cardinal directions, and then you have an analog gun that allows you to shoot and target as well as swing left and right. It takes more than a minute to understand how the controls work, but once you get used to them, it is absolutely second nature. And you'll see here we get a little prompt for the next enemy we're taking on, and then suddenly we are able to move in a fully 3D space. Now, of course, this is all made with the sprites and background layer, so it's not 3D at all, but the illusion of such is absolutely incredible. This had really never been done in arcades before, and honestly, first-person shooters are not a huge arcade genre. We have stuff like Half-Life on the Taito Type X, but honestly, this is a really thin genre, but Taito did such an incredible job. They were onto something with the technology long before anybody else would be. Now, of course, the worlds aren't huge because it is moving a lot of sprites and scaling on real time, so you're not going to get the biggest levels to start, but what is here is just mind-blowing. I mean, this is 1992. Imagine seeing something like this on your Super Nintendo. It would be wild. The targeting definitely takes some getting used to because you're turning the gun to swing while also using it to aim. And you'll see there we have a special charge shot as well that's going to be hugely important. The first couple levels are generally easy, but this game does get exceedingly difficult as you move on. But it's just so much fun navigating this 3D screen space in that first-person shooter setup, playing an arcade game. It is wild, and you'll see there that it does give you the insignia to turn the gun left and right, because the 4 cardinal directions of the joystick are just going to move you forwards, backwards, and strafe you left and right. So you have both strafing and turning. It's kind of like mouse look with a keyboard in a modern first-person shooter, but done in 1992. And you will see it gives you options on who you want to take on next, so there are some slight branching pathways in the game. Now, interestingly, some cutscenes just don't have any audio whatsoever or just sound effects. In some ways, it feels like this game isn't finished. The gameplay is 100% finished, but the story and some of those inner cuts just seem to maybe be that it was rushed out the door. But this is the type of arcade cabinet you're probably not going to see very often whatsoever. If you do see one, throw credits into it because your mind will be blown dealing with how to control it and learning it. I do this with an Xbox One controller as well as a flight stick in my hand. It's a very complex setup, but it does give me the best ability to kind of swing that gun around and aim with the flight stick. And this does emulate perfectly on MAME the way I'm playing it here because I do not have an original arcade board. But let's just talk about how good this game really looks. Those sprites are huge, they're detailed. As you're moving around the stages, everything scales really well. This stage right here is huge. It's definitely doubling back on itself and repeating, but we go from outside to into this tunnel and we're rotating in a full 360 degrees to keep up with our opponent. It's such a wild look. This is impressive today. Obviously, technology has eclipsed it, but still seeing this, I'm impressed. But imagine being back in 1992 and you walk into your local arcade and you see Gunbuster. It would be so much fun, and it was also called Operation Gunbuster in certain territories, so maybe this is a modern version of Operation Wolf or Operation Thunderbolt, because it did use that name. It doesn't really ever tie the story together, but it is interesting that maybe this was supposed to be part of that series. You will see I take my first death there, and you do get an option for 4 different playable characters, but all the differences is that charge shot is slightly different graphically. You don't really ever see your player character, so honestly that choice is relatively meaningless, I would say. But it's fun to have the choice all the same. But I love that this city transitions from daytime to sunset to nighttime, and the city scrolling around in the back just looks so good with all of that parallax scrolling. When this game is doing all these things visually, it looks incredible. But it also has an absolutely incredible soundtrack, so go ahead and listen for like 45 seconds, and I'll come back and talk more about the history of Gunbuster. But enjoy. Just another classic Taito soundtrack that sounds perfect for the game. But in this boss fight here, it's just fun when you get into these more enclosed corridors and you really have to navigate around, moving forwards, backwards, left and right while also swinging the gun around. Once you get used to the navigation system and the controls, everything does really come alive. Now, if there's one thing I would say that's negative about Gunbuster is that it is quite short. You can see the end of this game in about 12 minutes. In some ways, it feels more like a technology demo than an actual video game, even though what's on offer here is a ton of fun. I just wish it had been a lot longer, or we had seen a Gunbuster 2 that would have basically expanded on everything. Sometimes you will see with the sprite scaling that things do come in and out of the roof as you get towards the edge of the wall there. It just seems to be a limitation on how the hardware works, but it is still so impressive. This is a real 3D space, obviously made out of 2D components, but it makes you feel like you really are operating in 3 dimensions, and this definitely, in my opinion, looks a lot better than Wolfenstein 3D, even though it's using the same kind of technology behind the engine. It just has better sprites, it's moving more things around on screen at once, and it is never slowing down. That is the incredible thing about this. It is a technology showcase that's also fun to play, that also works extremely well. It is just that good, and the final level has so much to do, but just moving around, seeing everything happen is great. Although I love that it gives you 30 seconds to escape the level, and I did it in, well, I guess it didn't even count down. We did it in under a second. Sometimes the game just makes you do things that are painfully easy, but make it seem like it's going to be hard. But moving on to the final boss battle here, you're going to see a giant brain, which interestingly enough, in Riding Fight, the final boss is also a giant brain, or about 30 smaller brains depending on the configuration. So clearly someone at Taito had a thing for brains in a jar, because they show up a lot, and you even get to talk to the brain. But honestly, the story you're getting here isn't going to make much contextual sense, because the story in Gunbuster is very loose, and you don't really ever know what it is you're 100% doing. And this is definitely a situation where the developers knew they wanted a couple extra credits before you saw the ending, because this boss is harder than anything else you're going to face in the game, and it seems to be able to shoot through walls, something that you're not able to do, and none of your opponents up until this point seem to be able to do either. But it's just so wild to think that this came out in the same time period as Wolfenstein 3D, because while this game definitely looks better, I would give Wolfenstein 3 the edge in the gameplay department, but Taito was very, very close, and as a technological showcase of what could be done in arcades with 2D sprite scaling, this may be one of the most impressive sprite scaling games of all time. You're able to move around in 3D at your leisure, shooting at your opponent, and that is just wild. We hadn't really seen anything like this up until this point in time. But I am curious, have you ever played Gunbuster? And if not, do you plan on playing it after you see this video? Tell me down below in a comment, because I'm really curious to see who's ever even heard of this one, because it's definitely a Taito deep cut. And once we finally get the boss here and everything starts crumbling, we're going to get one last awesome look at how Taito scaled sprites around, because when we come through this tunnel right here, it really genuinely does look like you're moving in a 3D space. But yeah, I'll be back next Wednesday with more Taito Superscalers, and I'll have videos throughout the week as well. But if you've never played Gunbuster, I can't recommend it enough. It's an absolute mind-blowing technical showcase of what you could do with 2D sprites back in 1992. This building is now going to blow up, and I will see you guys next time. There it goes. Bye-bye.